welcome back to a year of Final Fantasy, and we're still in the month of Hades, and it's been a while since we've done a proper job video, so that's what we're going to be doing today. And let's check a few more of those jobs off the list. I'm going to try and go down the list with the more popular ones. Of course, we've already covered the most popular ones, I believe, anyway. So the next one's up. We're going to go into solid B class territory here, but some of these are the most interesting, if I do say so myself. And today we're going to be talking about two different classes, one of which has been seen in many different games, and another one that's kind of been there, I guess, I don't know, in the background. And of course, the one that's been seen everywhere is the Gambler. And the other, in my opinion, is quite simply like the Blue Mage. It's incredibly interesting, and it's an underused job, and that's the Geomancer. If you haven't guessed yet, I really enjoy elemental aspects of fantasy, earth, fire, wind, water, that type of stuff, and Geomancers harness those elements around them, but it's the way in which they do it is pretty interesting in the Final Fantasy realm. Now, we'll get into that in a little bit, but let's talk about the Gambler right now. So the Gambler first appeared in Final Fantasy VI, or if you want to go the old school US nomenclature, it began in Final Fantasy III with the character of Setzer. Though it wasn't specifically said, if I had to guess, we got Setzer directly from the influence of comic book heroes at the time, and really which was the biggest hero in the early 90s? That would have been, obviously, Gambit from X-Men. Setzer uses dice and cards as his weapons of choice, and for whatever reason, people love the idea of those being awesome weapons. And to be fair, alright, it is cool, but you know, come on, between a sword and like chunking dice or cards at people, I'm gonna take the sword. But they clearly made some bank on it, and that's a bad pun, I'm sorry. And the Gambler was here to stay from here on out, maybe if not specifically in a Gambler form, he's been, I don't know, introduced into other characters, so we do see him most of the time in one form or another. The Gambler's iconic attack is known as slots, which is the primary thing that we're going to be seeing again and again and again in the franchise with a bunch of different other characters, like I said before, that aren't specifically Gamblers. But anyway, as cool as Gamblers are, let's take a look at all who embodies the class itself, or at least let's look at the characters that have a little bit of gamble in them. And that's a weird turn of phrase, but anyway, let's do it. Alright, of course, as I said, Setzer Gabbiani. I thought it was Gabini, but it's Gabbiani. Alright, so that is our forefather Gambler, and he's a cool character. He wears a long black trench coat, he's pretty pale guy, and he sports an iconic long silver hairdo who has a way with the ladies. Now, does that ring any bells? And you'll get that reference here in a minute. I seem to remember that an ultra cool character with super long hair appears later in a particular game, but I'm not sure where. You know, maybe jog my memory. But anyway, that's Setzer Gambiani. Next up, we have the incredibly strange Kate Sith, whose limit break plays off of those dice and slots, which are basically just modified forms of Setzer's arsenal, but essentially work in the same way. Tifa herself actually gets a little bit of gamble in her, but she is obviously a monk type of character, but whenever you do activate her limit break, you get these slots to power up her attacks. In Final Fantasy VIII, our resident gambler, I guess maybe, is Selphie, who sports the slot commands with her limit break, which corresponds to random spells and numbers, and basically it's however many number of times you get to cast a particular type of spell. So it's not, you know, totally gambler, but it's a little bit of gambler, and that word has lost all meaning now that I've said it about a billion times. She does have a thing for Irvin, who kind of has this, I don't know, maybe Setzer-ish vibe with his trench coat and long hair, though not silver long hair. In Final Fantasy X, Waka has a type of slot command which empowers his attacks with status effects and different elemental attributes. And 10-2 also has the Lady Luck dress sphere, which is actually legitimately called Gambler in the Japanese version of the game. In Final Fantasy XI, we were blessed with the Gambler class, except in this instance it's called the Corsair, but essentially it's the Gambler. I actually do like the Corsair name a little bit better than the word Gambler, but whatever, now you know that information. So in Final Fantasy XII, there is no Gambler as we know it, but let's be honest here, Balthier would be Setzer's brother if this was some kind of weird shipping relationship thing. It's weird. Anyway, in Final Fantasy Type 0, we do have Ace, who wields Gambler weapons in the form of cards, but other than that, it's not really any kind of total Gambler kind of influence there. And going on next in Final Fantasy 13, we don't have any legit Gamblers. In Final Fantasy 14, we do have the Astrologian, and before you shit yourself, no, obviously the Astrologian is a healer and it's not really Gambler at all, but they do use cards, and honestly that's pretty much the only stretch I can give them, but I figured it was worth mentioning. In Final Fantasy 15, again, no Gambler, but there are various games that you can play and gamble, I guess. So enough Gambler talk for now. Who is your favorite Gambler? Let me know, but let's go ahead and move on to the much more forgotten Geomancer. And actually, you know what, that isn't fair. The Geomancer appears in quite a few games actually, but it's one of those always kind of bridesmaid, never a bride type of things. Geomancers are usually stuffed into the backgrounds of the games that they're in, but they are some of the most unique classes in the entire franchise, and they too, like gamblers, rely on some kind of random chance in the way of their battle, at least in the way that most games handle them. So what exactly is a Geomancer? Well, it's a class that's kind of hard to pin down. You could definitely put them in the mage, magic-y kind of job category, and to get it out of the way, there's never been a real spotlight Geomancer character in the series, kind of. I'm going to go into something a little bit here later on, which kind of blew my mind when I figured it out. But anyway, Mog from Final Fantasy VI, if you want to call him a Geomancer, that would probably be apt because he does have a lot of Geomancer abilities, but they're actually packaged as dances, so you could call Mog like a dance Geomancer hybrid. I don't know, I'm obviously looking too far into this. But anyway, there are some named Geomancers other than Mog that appear throughout the series, like Geomancer Yugalu in Final Fantasy XII. And here's the weird thing that I was talking about just before, and that is that Eris was actually supposed to be a Geomancer in Final Fantasy VII, but the game went towards a jobless kind of system as development went on, and that kind of got wiped out, but you can still feel some little traces of that in there. Obviously, most of us right now would place her in a white mage territory, but I can see how Eris could have been a Geomancer with her particular ties to the planet, the Cetra race, and her limit breaks, all of which are drawing kind of like power from the earth. So hey, you know, if you want to go that route, maybe the best known character in Final Fantasy, or one of the best known characters, actually is a Geomancer. I don't know, that's kind of cool. It's kind of the way that, you know, like Ultimecia, though not a time mage called like that proper, is a time mage. So kind of weird thing there. Anyway, the Geomancer's claim to fame is his terrain, and I'm sorry that that rhymed, but we're running out of time. All right, I'll never do that again. So anyway, each time that we have the use of the terrain option, it does actually depend on the Geomancer's surroundings, and it does have various effects. For instance, if we were in a cold place with snow or ice or something like that, you could expect a cold-based elemental attack. And if you're in a volcano, you can, you know, maybe expect something fire-based, maybe sometimes even earth-based. If you're out on the open plains, maybe you're gonna get a tornado. What if you're on the ocean? Well, probably there's gonna be some kind of water-based, maybe tsunami attack or something like that. There are a ton of different attacks, and they do vary from game to game, so they can be incredibly powerful, but many times the terrain can, like I said, have multiple attacks, and more often than not, you're basically relying on randomly generated numbers to give you whatever that thing that you're going to be doing is, so they're just completely not reliable in that aspect, again going hand in hand with the Gambler. Anyway, outside of the realm of battle, the Geomancer, assuming you're playing one, can walk across hazards and traps without taking any damage or tripping them or whatever you want to call it, assuming the game actually does incorporate those types of hazards. So now we're going to move on to one of the weirdest aspects of the Geomancer, and that is his attire and his weapon, like if you can even call it that. So now, while the Gambler has his cards and dice, and that's kind of a cool factor type of deal, you know, obviously they're useless in battle, the Geomancer's weapons and attire, it's just totally bizarre. I mean, you can't think about it logically. The Geomancer's clothing of choice is what is essentially early 1900 era pajamas, with the head caps and the poofy ball on the end, and what's even stranger is his weapon, and that really actually legitimately hurt me to call it a weapon. It's a bell. Come on, people. That's it. It's a bell. I mean, what more could you possibly say about it? Bards have harps, and the harps are there to kind of bolster your party and all that, but a bell? Come on, you can do one thing with the bell. You can ring it. I'm at a loss for words, basically, so I'm gonna just move on. To wind this video down, the Geomancers have been in many of the Final Fantasy games. Most notably, they're in the games that do emphasize the job system. They began in Final Fantasy III, that is the real Final Fantasy III, and then appeared in most games after that, if not just being alluded to. Notable exceptions are, of course, Final Fantasy IX, which you would have probably expected to have a Geomancer even if in the background, but there, as far as I know, isn't one. Final Fantasy X didn't have one either, and none of the major franchise games after 13 have really even alluded to them at all. But they are a pretty big staple of the Tactics series, which is where it really gets to shine, since the Tactics are, like, you know, strategically based combat maps, and that relies heavily on terrain. And I think, as far as I know, the most recent big Final Fantasy game, with a Geomancer to be featured in any kind of major playable way is Final Fantasy Explorers. That is an incredibly underrated 3DS game, and in that game, the Geomancers wield bells, of course, and clubs. And if you master the job, you can actually dual wield those items. So, all right, I'm gonna leave you with this thought. Imagine a crazy lunatic running at you in pajamas with a bell in one hand and a club in the other. Is that not the most frightening, terrifying thing ever? I mean, perfect for October Halloween month. All right, guys, I'm gonna leave you there. Thank you so much for watching this. And I know I say it a lot, but please share this around if you enjoy it. Help me grow. I'm still a just completely microscopically small channel in the realm of YouTube. And I know a lot of you have messaged me and left comments about how much you're enjoying this thing. And it really does make it all worth it. This whole big project. We're 81 videos in. and really all of your support does keep me going. Even if it's just one or two of you, it does get me psyched up to do these other videos going forward. And this is video 81. How insane is that? So thank you all so much for sharing, liking, commenting, and of course the big one, subscribing. I know you hear it all over YouTube, but it really does mean so much to me as a small creator. So for the next 2 cycles, the next 2 year Final Fantasy games, we're going to be coming up on the game of the month that is Final Fantasy X, and along with that we're going to get Final Fantasy X-2. So we're approaching a situation like we had way back when I talked about Final Fantasy IV in the after years, as Final Fantasy X-2 is a true sequel. As of this recording, I haven't decided if I'm going to do X-2 before or after I talk about 10. So if you have a preference, please leave it in the comments below. It'll definitely influence me on which one to make first. Otherwise, as always, until next time, Crystal Warriors, keep on gaming.